Instagram DM with everyone earlier. Oh, we're live already.
Hello.
Hi, well, welcome. Thanks for coming, everyone. I guess I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves really quick. I'll go first just to kick it off. I'm Amanda. My pronouns are she, her. I run a literature website called Bookish Brews, where I focus specifically on global majority authors. And then you can find me pretty much everywhere at Amanda's Brews. Whoever wants to go.
Uh-oh. It's a polite off.
Oh, no.
All right, I'm happy to hop in. So hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Maldonado, she, her pronouns. I'm a young adult author of rom-coms for fat brown girls, fat brown queer girls, really. So my first book, Fat Chance Charlie Vega, came out in 2021. And my most recent book, No Filter and Other Lies, explored this girl who really was interested in catfishing people on Instagram and came into her queerness as part of that. So that was a really fun book. So that's me. And you can find me everywhere at Crystal Wrote, Instagram, TikTok, all the places.
Awesome. I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura, she and they pronouns. I am also a young adult author and illustrator. I mainly make graphic novels, and my very first graphic novel, or graphic memoir specifically, is Messy Roots, which was published last year. And now I'm working on another graphic novel that is also super sapphic and just like super fun. So excited to talk about that with y'all today. And I'm here in San Francisco, but you can also find me online anywhere at Hey Laura Gao.
Love it.
Me and Lyla face off.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Lyla. I write books for kids and also young adults. I specifically also write queer YA. I'm here to talk about Flip the Script, which is a sapphic K-drama book. It's about a Korean American actress who is starring in the year's biggest K-drama, and everyone expects her to fall in love with her male co-star, but she falls in love with her rival and female co-star instead. And then you can find me everywhere at Literary Lyla.
And hi, I'm Jas Hammonds. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the author of We Deserve Monuments. It came out last year, and it's a book about a 17-year-old high school senior who is uprooted from her life in DC and moves down to small town rural Georgia to meet the terminally ill grandmother that she's never known. And along the way, she uncovers a lot of family secrets and starts falling for the girl next door. So a little bit of romance, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of, general
Got it all.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So I wanted to start out fun with my questions. So this is for everyone. All my questions are for everyone, so we could just round table. What is your favorite thing about writing your characters falling in love?
The swoon. Like,
Yes! Someone said it.
Yeah, the swoon. I think that it's just like so fun to revisit the feelings, especially in YA, because a lot of times things are happening for the very first time. So emotions are so big, so grand, so all encompassing. And I think that it's so fun to explore that crush sensation that, it felt like this is everything in the world, that I think can sometimes be lost when you get a little older.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I love to live vicariously through my characters, mainly
Yes.
because I came out after my teenage years. I came out in college, and so I never really had
Same
that
here.
experience when I was in high school. And I base a lot of like the really like messy but like funny kind of meet cutes and also like love stories based off of a lot of my love life afterwards. And my friends would joke that, this is like too dramatic, too messy. But I'm like, no, this is just my late coming of age.
I love that.
Like, you got that in teenage years, I'm doing it now. So I love writing that into my characters and just giving, folks now who do have the ability to come out earlier and like really embrace that love for themselves to experience it.
I think for me specifically because I write like friends to lovers, I love that moment when that realization kicks and you're like, oh shoot, I actually like this person more than a friend. That oh no moment is like one of my favorite things to write.
Oh yeah, that's the best. For me, I also love all of the subtleties of like the stress of, oh my God, is that person looking at me? How were they looking at me? What did that glance mean? We touched pinkies, and could this be, you know what I mean? Like all of those things where you're suddenly hyper focused. Like as a chronic overthinker, this is me all the time, but especially, when you're in the beginning stages of a relationship and everything induces those like butterflies in your stomach. I don't know. I shouldn't love writing about overthinking and stressing, but I do because I think it's so fun.
I feel like those moments really give us as readers butterflies as well. So they're fun to read.
The hope, right?
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I love all of those things. I think based on reading for the last few years, I've seen the landscape of publishing change so much. And I really want to talk about that because I think that's really on brand for this panel. So how has queer and BIPOC representation in literature evolved through your careers as writers, but also as readers?
Yeah, I feel like you're totally right that things have really evolved over the years, thankfully. I definitely still think we have a ways to go, but the fact that we can build a queer BIPOC author panel and all have different books is already, to me, a wonderful step in the right direction. But I mean, even going back to, I was racking my brain trying to think about what was the first like queer story I read. And then also trying to figure out like queer brown story. And I don't think I read one of those until I was in maybe my late 20s or something. Like it was something I had to actively seek out, right? It wasn't something that sort of just fell in my lap, right? Because like queer stories for so long, I think were white, cis, gay men a lot of times. And so those were wonderful. I loved reading those, but I also yearned for so much more. And so I'm really grateful that there are all of these different books now that feature these different main characters who experience their own versions of queerness and their own versions of brownness. And what does that sort of look like?
Yeah. I think I would have so I was a teenager in the, mid aughts, and it was like Gossip Girl was that kind of stuff. And I think that I remember like the first, lesbian book that I read was probably something by Julianne Peters. And so it was, very white. And I'm pretty sure it had like a really sad ending, but I clung to it because I'm like, this is all that I know. So I agree, Crystal. I was in my 20s when I read finally like some queer brown girls getting to be cute. And I actually think that the book that like was my light bulb moment was Gabby Rivera's Juliet Takes a Breath.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, like we can do this. It does exist. And that was only, I believe, 2016 when that book came out. And so now I'm just so happy that there is like an abundance of BIPOC queer authors. Of course, I want more. I want more Black trans femmes in the space. I want, more disabled queer writers. But I think that I just am happy that, there are queer Black writers that I can look up to and like, point to them as inspiration and like kind of like leading the way for me to publish a book that is so unapologetically Black and queer, like We Deserve Monuments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started writing books as a teenager myself in the 2000s, and like everyone else said, the books were either about like white princesses like in gowns, or like or like Twilight, or like or when we had like queer books, it's like David Levitan, those like white gay books, and no shade to like any of those people, but it kind of like, it's interesting because I was looking at through my old manuscripts, and I just remember distinctly that like as a teenager myself was surrounded by like white cis stories. I was like thinking, oh, like I guess this is what sells. Like in my own books, I wrote about like white teens, like hetero teens falling in love, and it wasn't until I reached college that I felt like, oh, actually, might be people interested in that, and it's kind of sad to like think about because like I was a teen, and the fact that like I myself didn't think that stories about people like me couldn't do well in the industry or even sell, it's kind of really heartbreaking. But at the same time, I'm glad that things have changed, especially in the last few years, and hopefully it will keep getting better and better and more diversified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely like +1 to all of that. I think I would love to speak also towards graphic novels since that's a lot of my space. And one thing I've noticed is that comics like has always been quite um, diverse and queer in terms of the creators, but not so much the stories. And only recently have we really started to see that show in the books. And one book that really, really changed how I saw queer stories that I read when I was first making Messy Roots is a book called Squad by Maggie Tsukuda Hall. And for those who haven't read Squad, it's like this Asian American girl who kind of gets caught up in like the mean girl scene at school, but then it turns out these mean girls are actually werewolves that are like preying on predatory men. And I will like include some spoilers there here to show my point, but I remember like the whole premise, I was reading it and I was like, oh, okay, this is like a really cool feminist story. It's quite obvious that she's straight because they, it's just these mean girls talking about the hot guys that they're dating. And then suddenly, like towards the end, she like sudden full on page where she like gets close with one of the girls, and then they just full out make out. And like the thing about graphic, yeah. And I was like Pikachu, like I just like turn the page, I see them make out, and I'm like meme, like
Yeah.
what? Yeah, and the thing about like seeing it fully drawn out, right? And there's also like after they make out, there's like another scene where they're making out, but like kind of like shirtless. And this is like a YA book, right? And I was thinking at first, I was like, wow, like she really went there. Oh my god. But then I was like, why am I surprised? Like there's so many straight YA books where they straight on even like talk about sex, right?
Yeah.
So like just because it's drawn and visual and in graphic novel form, like as a teen, I would have loved that too, right? And so I think like that made me a lot more bold and braver to like be explicit in my queer love scenes and like in Messy Ruse, and also this book I'm writing about. Like, yes, they are going to full on make out. Yes, you're going to see all like all of it on that page, and you're going to enjoy it. And like, yeah, so I think that's something that I'm really proud to see queer graphic novels evolving into. And it is unfortunate that like because it's more visual, it then causes more trouble with like bans and stuff. But I do hope people like keep firm on that stance.
Amazing. Actually, speaking on like things that you wanted to like include in your novels, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask everyone. Laura, you kind of already answered, so you can or you don't have to answer again. But what are some things that you like purposefully were adamant to include in your stories, and also something that you were adamant to not include in your stories? Might be a difficult question.
I think for me, definitely a happy ending. And also, well, it's kind of like hard because I didn't want to create books that were too unrealistically happy because growing up queer and queer POC is like really hard. So I did want to address the challenges of that, but also I didn't want like to fall into trap of like the bury your gays trope, where it's like because like the representation that I had growing up was that where like I'd watch K-dramas where like, oh, of course the lesbian girl dies, like or gets bullied. So like I really wanted to create like a happy ending, and not include like a tragic death or a tragic ending. Yeah.
had some of the same thoughts, like trying to make a romance that feels like it could happen to you, and it feels like you get to live out all of the tropes that are typically like reserved for those, you know, heteronormative white like romances. I wanted to have that for my characters too, because to me it always felt like, well, why not me? Why can't someone like me experience some of those same things, and be that main character and get to just, you know, be desired and be appreciated. And so for me, that was a big thing I wanted to include in books, was just making sure that they felt every bit as tropey as we deserve, because there is something really, I think, special about that. And when I'm writing my books, especially No Filter and Other Lies, which is about this girl who she doesn't realize she's bi at the beginning of the book, and she sort of comes into her own queerness, which is was very much similar to my story. So one of the things I wanted to include was have her be in this relationship and be desired by like a cute girl and a cute boy, and have it be like there's no wrong way to sort of be bi, and there is no wrong way to have a body, and, you know, fat queer brown girls, we can be very desirable too, because I don't think that is the narrative that we get as often as we deserve. And then one of the things I wanted to make sure that I guess didn't show in the book was I didn't have like a huge coming out scene for Kat, not because I don't think those are important. I think those are incredibly important, because that wasn't similar to my experience. So I came into my queerness very late in life. I was already married to like a cis white dude. Like I had a kid already, and I was one of those like, oh no, I'm a pandemic queer. Oh, I suddenly have all this time to think about how I have been like admiring girls my whole life, and that might mean something. And I think that's also like, I was really embarrassed about it at first, but I realized there's nothing really to be embarrassed about. You know, you can come into your queerness at any point in your life. And so having Kat have this like kind of soft coming out, where she comes out to her grandma and her grandma's just like, cool, I love you, let's go celebrate that, very much kind of mirrored what I was experiencing when I came out to my husband and told him, like, you know, we had been together since high school, and I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm bi. And he was like, yeah, honey, you've been bi the whole time. Like, we knew that, and I love that for you. And I was like, oh man, how come you didn't tell me? So I wanted to do like my own version of coming out for Kat, where like, yeah, sometimes it is something you grapple with for a really long time, and then sometimes you're very fortunate to hopefully have a support system, whatever that looks like, and it is, they just like is what it is, like and you are embraced and loved, and that I think can be very valid as well.
I think for me with Monuments, I knew going in when we were trying to sell the book, like publishing is very white, and there's a lot of white gatekeepers that hold the keys to certain, you know, to books being published. And so I think that I was worried about you know, the idea that publishing is like, in order to sell your book, it has to be relatable. And in you know, if you're not going to have a white main character, then you need to have a white love interest, because white people need to be able to see themselves in some way in this book. And I was very adamant against that. And I've always, you know, in Monuments, the love interest is a Black femme girl. She always has been there. And I was like, I will never change this. Like, I was very adamant, like, I want Black girls to know that like they are worthy of love. They deserve to be the love interest. It doesn't have to be, you know, this white ideal. And luckily I didn't. It was a really hard sell, because when we first took it out on submission, it languished for almost a year, and editors were just like, the writing is great, but I just don't really connect to this. And
Oh, got that too.
That's the worst.
The classic rejection.
like, I don't connect to this. I don't have a spark. And guess what? All of those editors were white. Like a lot of times there was nothing wrong like that with the book that they could point to. It was just like, and I'm not saying that was the reason, but I think we know. So when I finally did find the editor who was meant to work on this book, of course, it ended up being a Black, queer, femme editor who got what I'm trying to do and never asked me to settle. So that was something that I was like, nope, not changing, really firm. And as far as things that I didn't include, I don't think that there was anything that I was like, no, I'm not going to include this. Like, I think that it is really, it's a really bittersweet book. There's a lot, it's pretty hard. And I recommend that everybody look at the content warnings. I have them on my website before you go into it to know that there are a lot of topics that are more difficult. It has a bittersweet ending. And I just needed to, I didn't put anything off limits when I was trying to tell this story. I just was like, I need to tell this story and this is the way that I want to do it.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. So my next question is kind of going off of what Crystal was talking about with support systems. Can you talk about the support systems that your characters have in their books, and why they're important and why you wanted to include them in the way that you did? Or didn't have them, I don't know.
I'm happy to hop in there. So in No Filter, Kat has kind of a complex system of supporters. Like she grows up into this kind of non-traditional family where she's raised by her maternal grandparents who very much love her, care for her, and are there for her, accept her as she is. They love her as a photographer. They love her as this little bi baby. They love her in all of her forms. But at the same time, she is living right down the street from her parents, her bio parents, and her little brother. And so she has never lived with them. And so she very much feels like an outsider kind of within the nuclear family structure that exists so close, yet it is something for her that she can't actually access. And so for her, a lot of her insecurities are sort of built from that, really from childhood, this whole idea of, I am close to my family physically, but emotionally, it feels really tough to access that. And a lot of my books do talk about these complicated family dynamics, just because for me, when I was growing up, I lived the same scenario that Kat did, and always was watching things like I grew up in like the Full House era and the Disney TV shows era. And so it was like every family was like a nuclear family and they solved every problem by like hugging after 20 minutes, you know what I mean? And everything was magically fixed. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not what my family looks like at all. And so for her, part of her journey and part of the struggle is to realize how she does have a support system. It's just not in the traditional way that she kind of wished it was. She has support in her grandparents. She has support through her friends who sort of become this like found family for her. And I think that really resonates with a lot of queer folks who you have to make your own family sometimes. And that for Kat becomes how she is able to sort of support and love and appreciate herself, is by leaning on these other people who see her for who she is and appreciate where she's coming from.
Yeah, I really like that a lot, Crystal, about that complicated relationship. And I'm sure it's something a lot of us can relate to. I put that a lot also in my books. Messy Roots specifically because it is a memoir, so it's based off of my life, and I do think my family sounds a lot like sort of like what you're talking about. We're like, no, we did not hug. Our best resolution was just like being alone in our rooms overnight until we decide never to talk about it again.
Yes. No apologies ever, right? Like it's just
exactly right. It's apologies that your mom's like, okay, dinner's ready, and you're like, all right, time to get out of my room. So yes, I think like for Messy Roots, while I did write that complicated relationship that I had with my parents, I also leaned a lot on friends and other types of found family as that support, as well as my cousins back in China, since the book kind of bounces back and forth between the States and China. And in the second book, I wanted to lean on another support system that I guess later on as an adult, I didn't realize how much I appreciated as a kid. And that was my family's kind of like small Chinese church that we went to growing up. And I've always had also a very conflicting relationship with religion. And that is something that I want to focus on in the second book is how do you deal with church and religion whenever that small family is like the first people that accepted your own family when you immigrated to the US, right? And like what happened, like how do you decouple what they believe in with like what they actually show and do for you? And so I want to write about that type of support of like people who maybe like based on their beliefs or verbally do not like quote unquote support who you like, you know, your values and who you are, but they will still, you know, drive you to all of your basketball practices. They will still like bring you food when your parents are sick, you know, like how do you reconcile that? So I think that's something I want to really write upon in terms of support for the second book.
I think this panel could just be also renamed Complicated Family Dynamics. we all like, yeah, me too. And Monuments is no different. Like the whole book is like the premise is just, you know, that love and hatred, that squash and stretch that you feel with your family where you love them so much, but also there's a lot of things that we don't talk about. And I know that like my family was also is also extremely avoidant and like we don't talk about things. It's just kind of like anyway. And so like with Monuments and my main character Avery, she starts the book, she's already out and her parents like have no qualms with it, but there's a beautiful scene that actually happens later where her mom comes out to her, and it's I think that it's something really special that I wanted to include in the book was this generational queerness. And like it's not just young people who get to come out, like some people come out in their 40s and their 50s, their 60s and beyond. And so it's one of my favorite scenes in the book where a mom is allowing herself to be vulnerable with her kid and being able to say, oh, by the way, like I'm bisexual too. And I just, you know, I think that that's really special. And I just wanted to give a nod to people who do come out later in life.
That's amazing. For my books, definitely the complicated family relationships as well. Yeah, because I was thinking about because I was thinking about like, oh, it's yearning for like family rather than romance. So I think that's why it was so important for me to include like the found family of queer friends in both Albedo 1 and the script, especially because I didn't have that growing up. Like I also didn't know I was queer until I was 20. So for me to, it's funny because like one of the greatest like criticisms I get from my books is, oh, this is like a self-insert like fantasy where the author wants to be a K-pop star. I'm like, that's not it at all, because you couldn't pay me enough to be a K-pop star or a K-drama actress. Like I hate being this under pretension. But what was like a wish fulfillment fantasy for me was the fact that my characters did have like a sapphic group of friends or like a queer group of friends growing up. Because meanwhile, me like growing up in like Texas and like Catholic, in a traditional Korean household, like I didn't even know like teens, like I mean not teens, I didn't even know that like age people could be queer because my parents were like, oh, it's like a white people thing. So actually though, so and also like we did have like a gay straight alliance like club in my high school, but it was like all white people. So I was like, oh, I guess my parents are right. So for me, like including like an Asian queer like found family was like very important in my books, because that's what I wanted teens today to be able to see in books, and like so they could see that they weren't as alone as they thought they were. Yeah.
Amazing. So this question, my next question is, I firmly believe that inspiration for writing comes from not only other writers, but I think it comes from our life. And I think we've touched on that like so much today.
Group
So
therapy.
yeah, in front of people, it's fine. So what or who are some of your biggest inspirations as writers, or as people, or as things, whatever, what has inspired you to write?
Okay, I'll start. I want to shout out just some fantastic, like Black queer YA writers who make some, books that really inspire me. Rebecca Barrow, Kayla Akram, Ashley Woodfolk are all like some of my go-to auto-buy authors. But I'm also really inspired by music. I have like an extensive playlist for everything that I write, and I see my books as like a series of scenes that happen, and like I have a soundtrack going on, so I'm real extra in that way. But I'm like really inspired by like Janelle Monáe, like who just dropped
I love her.
Oh,
fantastic new album. If you haven't listened to it yet, listen to it. And like
it's so good.
I'm going to a concert.
Oh my
I'm excited, but like hearing like artists who you can just tell they're having the time of their life, like making music, making art. Like I think that's really inspiring, because that's what I want to convey in my books, is like, yes, it could be a hard topic or like a really difficult scene, but I want you to know that like I put my whole heart into this. Like I never want to come across as like half-assed in anything that I do. So artists like, Janelle Monáe, I'm just using her as like my example. The album is so good, are really inspiring to me.
Besides real life and also music, huge shout out to Janelle Monáe and like Kehlani, Haley Kiyoko, all like the amazing queer icons. For me, besides books, I think I'm very inspired by a lot of film that I watch. And I think film also has had this renaissance of being able to make not only queer stories about being queer, but queer stories about just being messy and everything in between. And, just happens that the main characters are queer. And one movie I watched recently, because San Francisco has like one of the biggest LGBTQ film festivals I go to every year. But there's this movie that's about to come out called Bottoms. And it's like super just like wild and messy. It's about these like high school girls who they start like a fake fight club to try to get close to their like femme crushes, and they like pose it as like, oh, we're just learning how to get strong and tough to protect us from predators, but really they're just trying to like make out with everyone there. And it's like, I think just really like funny premises like that are things that are like really inspire me, where like people can like, let's just let teens be teens. And I also watch a lot of like documentaries, because I think documentaries like show a lot of like real life stories, but like in this very kind of like dramatic way. And so I think it's like also a great way of storytelling that I take a lot of inspiration from.
I love all of that. And I also take a lot of inspiration just from things that I'm enjoying myself. So yes, music, definitely movies, a little bit of everything. But I also feel like what drew me to like becoming a writer and really wanting to pursue writing was I have like such a specific memory of finally reading a book about a fat girl when it wasn't even that long ago. It was Dumplin' by Julie Murphy, like the fat girl book. And like reading this rom-com and seeing how Willow Dean was just like this badass who gets to like have it all. And I remember reading that and being like, oh my God, what about fat brown queer girls? Like, could we also have it all? And just being totally blown away by that idea and concept. And now I feel like very fortunate to have read also Gabby Rivera's Juliet Takes a Breath was a huge inspiration. And getting to just read these books that explore all of these different identities that I have, and also that a lot of authors have that don't on readers. I mean, not authors, but also authors. But like exploring these identities that don't often get featured as like the main character. I get so inspired by those stories because there is something so validating about being able to see a piece or a part of yourself in a book. And that is what I come back to a lot. So I'm inspired a lot about the stories written by like Anna Marie McLemore, who is incredible and writes these amazing queer sapphic romances that are just chef's kiss perfect. And Raquel Vasquez Gilliland, who writes these stories about like women who have these like magical experiences and also big bodies and are also gorgeous. And like those are the things I feel like that make me want to keep doing this. The idea that we could maybe make books that really are appealing to readers who don't ever get to see themselves in these lights.
I also like, aside from like books and music, I would say that, well, first of all, shout out to Maldonado and Cindy Pon, who like when I was growing up, those are the first Asian authors that I saw like on shelves. And I love how they are still writing today. And as for like other sources of inspiration, I think for me, definitely my friends, because as I said before, like growing up, my support system was my friends rather than my like actual family. So I think it's funny because like I don't consciously make the choices of like including my friends in my books, but I'd be reading my books. One of my friends would be reading it and be like, "Hey, isn't this like me?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's like actually, oh, that's a mistake. Don't sue me." So I mean, it's not, so it's like it's not like I don't like actually copy and paste their personalities, but like random little traits, like like someone like peeling like the fruit this way, or like someone who really likes hot Cheetos. So I feel like those small details my friends always make an appearance in my books. Yeah.
That's so cute. I love that.
Right? Like I would be honored if you picked a trait from me and it became a character. I'm like, oh my God, I am famous.
But if they were asking me that, I'd be like, please don't look.
I'd be like, who?
Perfect. Well, so you all write pretty contemporary stories. So what do you find so powerful about writing queer BIPOC stories in a contemporary setting, and what draws you to that?
For me, I think of contemporary stories as just feeling like home for me. So especially as someone who came into their queerness late in life, as someone who I had trouble accepting my body for what it was when I was a teenager, growing up kind of like during the early aughts where it was like you had to be thin or else. So a lot of it for me is sort of like getting to build these stories that share ideas and not really lessons, but like realities that I wish I had been able to experience when I was that age, right? Like when I was a teenager, I wish somebody had said like, hey, your body is good as it is, or hey, there's no right way to be queer, or there's no right way to be Latina. And so I'm hopeful when I create these stories that are contemporary, it feels like it is validating to the people who need it the most. And so much of the world right now feels really scary, I think. And so there is this sense of like, well, it is terrifying, but I can create this like little pocket of joy or of laughter or of something that can show kind of like the hopefulness that still exists in this otherwise like very dark timeline. And so that is something that's really important to me. And I really just want to, I guess, carve out this space for these people who don't often get that joy and provide that hopefully in this one like tiny way. Although, let me just be honest, I will take queer BIPOC stories set anywhere. So if you want to set them on the moon, underwater, in a different reality, like I am all for it.
Anywhere.
Yeah, I grew up reading a lot of mostly contemporary, honestly. Like I really missed like the Twilight wave and all of that stuff because it's just, I was reading like Sarah Dessen and
Same.
you know, that was just always what I gravitated towards. So I think when I started writing, I just naturally fell into contemporary, and I've tried branching out into other genres, and it's really hard because I feel like I'm really bad at world building. I'm just gonna be honest, and so I like contemporary for the fact that I'm like, this is our world, like. I don't have to do that much research. But in all seriousness, I love that it's like a possibility model, because I love the, the range and expansion that queer BIPOC stories are going into, like horror and fantasy. But I think that there's just something so comforting about a contemporary story and being like, this can happen. Like, maybe we won't be on a spaceship headed towards the far reaches of the galaxy, but maybe I can meet a cute girl and we go to prom together. Like, I think that there's just something that's so comforting and joyful in that. And so I will always love contemporary, especially queer YA contemporary, because that is where I just think of it as like my author writing roots are.
I'm going to out myself by saying I actually hated contemporary when I was a kid.
No, but actually, same here.
Yeah, I think I remember as a kid, I was very angsty, and I was like, man, my life already sucks. Why would I want to read about other people's like shitty
That's so real.
It's very relatable though.
Yeah, and so like I would kind of like try to escape, right, through like sci-fi or fantasy and stuff like that. But I don't think it was until I was an adult and found contemporary books that were also queer and like Asian and folks of color, where I was like, wait a second, like I can read about them sucking, but at least I can relate and like, be able to grow from it. And so I think now why I like to write contemporary, and I still would love to like write sci-fi and like everything else as well, but at least these two books, the contemporary to me is very much a need to sort of like crystallize what's happening in the world right now into a book form. And in a way, we are like kind of like writing history and doing that to the future generations. And I want to be able to like not only include all these amazing queer pop culture references that are only happening now because like it's a lot more accepting than it was before, but also include all these changes too. Like my books are usually set in Texas because I also grew up there, and like in the second book I want to include a trans character and talk about the anti-trans bills happening in Texas. Like these are all the things that are happening in current life that by existing you are being political. And so that is something that like as an author I feel like I should include in these books.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think for me, I mean, no shade on like queer fantasies or like just fantasy in general. But I think there's something powerful about the representation that you can see in contemporary stories, and also like being able to see yourself in these realistic stories that I would have like. Well, actually. I'm thinking about how like when I was a teen too, I read mostly urban fantasy books. So, but hey, I mean, I think maybe if I saw myself on the cover of like books, maybe I would have read more contemporary. Who knows? But what I'm trying to say is like I think it's really I like write contemporary because I want teens today to be able to see themselves in like queer Asian teens today to be able to see themselves in a realistic setting in books. And like even if they don't read my books, they can at least see like an Asian girl on the cover and be like, hey, she's Asian like me. Because I didn't have that when I was a kid. And I feel like I like even if they don't read my books, like I rather they know that they're there. And I think that's something that's like I feel very grateful that I get to be a part of. And I also like hope that, like I said before, things just get more and more diverse so that like, well, actually, yeah, I did read this article about like how apparently like kids today, like they don't think about representation as much as we do because they're so used to like the books and the movies that are out now. But hopefully it stays that way where like kids don't have to think twice about like, oh, seeing a Black kid on the cover or like, an Asian kid on the cover. So hopefully it just like becomes better and better.
Yeah, that's what we're fighting for. I love that everyone says, like, you know, it's something that you want people to be able to see in real life, that they can feel like, you know, they feel seen. Speaking of that, what have been some of the best or most meaningful responses you've gotten from readers about your stories?
I don't want to speak for everybody, but anytime anyone even reads my book, I'm like, what? Oh my God. So
You're
that
a star.
is very validating. But some like really special ones for me with Fat Chance Charlie Vega, like I would get really, really emotional seeing people recreate the cover of the book. So the cover has I have it right here. So it's got like this fat brown girl and she's so cute, and they would like get the dress and recreate it, and that was just made me cry, because it was like, yes, we are getting our main character moment. We're getting to like feel beautiful and feel appreciated. And that was incredible. One reader got Charlie's glasses tattooed on her. And so like, I have that picture saved on my phone because I'm like, I made it. I feel like I made it.
That's how you know when they get a tattoo.
Right?
Oh, wow.
And then honestly, with my second book, No Filter and Other Lies, I mentioned that like Kat's journey, her family, her you know, journey to discovering she's bi really mirrors kind of my experience. And so anytime I hear from a reader who feels like they can relate to her, it's very validating to me and my experience. And when the book shows up on, you know, Pride lists and things like that, it just helps affirm me. And I don't think readers sometimes realize how powerful like their abilities are, and the fact that they are connecting with these characters. Like, we as authors are still like tending to our like child wounds, and so those things can be really very meaningful, especially this panel who, like we said, this is like one big therapy sesh. So
I'm so glad.
Yeah, I think writing books is just such an interesting thing that we all do, because like we're alone in our rooms all day, and then we're just like, you know, writing our own stories, like, you know, like whatever we do, and then like we put them out in the world, and then like it's always amazing when someone else says like, oh, I can actually relate with this, and then for me, for example, I wrote a very specific relationship dynamic between Sky, the main character of I'll Be the One, and her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I got so many emails like, oh, this is my parent, my mom and me too. And I'm like, oh, really? Did we have the same mom? I think that's like so like amazing and kind of weird, but in a good way, to like be able to connect with people that way. But also I think specifically in the queer context, I've gotten emails from like teens that were like, oh, your book, Flip the Script, inspired me to come out to my friends and family. And that's huge. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that my book had this like great impact in your life. And I think it's really amazing that my books are inspiring teens to like really like come to terms with the identity, and also like come out to their loved ones. So
yeah, I think that every time, like Crystal said, like, you read my book. It's really surreal. And my book, it came out, you know, 7 months ago, so I still feel like a brand new baby fawn, just like shaking on my legs and an event. And so anytime I get like messages or do a school visit, that's like super cool to like, you know, talk to teens and like have, you know, hear what they have to say. But I think that one of the most memorable moments was during my release week. I had an event in Atlanta, and it was a really small event because it was cold, it was rainy, but there was a young Black reader who showed up in her flower crown because like like sunflowers are really important in the book, and so she had like her sunflower like flower crown. She had her We Deserve Monuments tote bag, and she was there like sitting in the front, just so ready. And I was like, oh my gosh.
I'm gonna cry.
I know, I'm tearing up. That is so amazing.
You're about to make me cry. And I think that, you know, the huge festivals and all that stuff are cool, but the ones that just, really stick out to me the most are those small events where you have an audience of like 5 people and they're like, I came here to see you. Like, I don't care that it was raining or cold outside.
Yeah.
I'm here. And so I will never forget her. I'm not going to say her name, put her out there, but just know I always think of you.
Oh.
Yeah. My on my Messy Roots tour, one of the most also surreal events that I've gone to was I was invited to the public library at my hometown in Texas. And the reason it's surreal for me is because in the book, I didn't have a great time growing up there, where it was like also like very white, conservative, religious. And throughout my entire time in high school, I didn't really know a single other queer person. And so I had thought that after this book would come out, my whole city, like my hometown, would just ban me. And so when I got the invite from the library, I was like, oh, they actually want me. Okay. But it was actually like a really sweet moment, because like I remember the room was packed with all these like people of like all different types of races. And I had realized that like since the decade that I had gone to high school there, like my hometown did get like more diverse and a bit more open. And I think that was beautiful to see, because there were so many teens coming up to me being like, hey, like loved your book, it helped me also like sort of like come out and think about my identity. And even though it was more open, it still like wasn't, as open as like San Francisco or like some of these places. And I think the person that came to me that kind of surprised me the most actually was not a teen. It was a parent of a teen. It's kind of just like this like South Asian woman who came up, and she told me that by reading the book, it helped her understand her kid a lot more and what she was going through. And I remember like I was like about to like tear up, because as someone who like wish I had that with my parents growing up, and even now my parents like still don't really understand like the book and everything. I think it just like touched me so much that like a parent was willing to read this like YA graphic novel to understand her daughter. And so I think that's like touched me ever since.
That's beautiful.
All of that was so special. I have vastly over prepared questions, but I'm really, really glad we got to end on like a very emotional note. I think everything was so special. We're a little over, but can we all really, really quick tell everyone where we can find you?
Yes, we can do that. You can find me at Crystal Rowe on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and crystalrote.com.
And you can find me at Literary Lyla on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. And my website is lylaleebooks.com.
You can find me at Hey Laura Gao at all socials, and then my website is lauragao.com.
And I'm at jashammonds.com. I deleted my Twitter officially.
Good for you.
Had to go. So I'm just on Instagram at Jas Hammonds, and come hang out, say hi. I'd be on there posting silly stuff. So
perfect. And then I'm Amanda again. You can find me everywhere at Amanda's Brews and bookishbrews.com. Thanks for coming out, everyone. Yeah, this was so fun. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
This is a very fun panel. I was like talking to friends.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually make an Instagram group now.
Please do.
Yeah.
thank you all.